Hello and welcome to another edition of As the Blade Turns. My name is Dave Leese, and for those of you who are new here, please subscribe below. Well, I was planning an edition of this show to focus on words and actions. And while I was originally planning it to discuss the ongoing situation with the Terry Tudbaridze, Diana Davis, and Gleb Smolkin, which I'll get to later in the show, I was alerted to a situation in Sochi, Russia involving Viktor Petrenko over the weekend. For the sake of full transparency, I'm going to read the news that was posted on InsideTheGames.biz, and then I'll provide additional information and commentary after. The article reads, Viktor Petrenko has been axed as vice president of the Ukrainian Figure Skating Federation, UFSF, and dismissed from the organization over his involvement in a Russian ice show. The Olympic gold medalist participated in the Scarlet Flower show at the Sochi Park Arena on Friday, July 8th. The event was organized by Tatiana Navka, an Olympic ice dance champion who is married to Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov. Ukrainian-born Petrenko performed alongside Russian figure skating stars, including Kamila Valieva. The 53-year-old's decision to take part in the show has left the UFSF outraged, and they expelled him from the national governing body, where he served as vice president. The former athlete made his shameful decision despite the bloody full-scale war that Russia has been waging against Ukraine for the fifth month, a statement from the UFSF read. Thousands of peaceful Ukrainians have been killed and tortured by the aggressor, including hundreds of children, massive rocket attacks on our cities and villages, which have completely destroyed people's homes, and it did not become an obstacle for Viktor Petrenko to go out on the ice in the Russian ice in Sochi and perform on the same team with the supporters of this terrible war. The Presidium of the UFFC received many appeals and letters from members of the federation, athletes, and fans of figure skating, expressing not only righteous indignation at Petrenko's act, but also contempt for him as a person and an athlete. We are also grateful to the contributors for supporting the actions of the UFFC, which consistently condemns Russian aggression in Ukraine and provides its athletes with great help in these difficult times. The National Olympic Committee of Ukraine has also condemned Petrenko's participation in the ice skating event in Russia. Such an act is unacceptable for the Olympic community of Ukraine, the NOCU said. Petrenko is an Olympic, world, and European champion in men's singles, representing the Soviet Union, Unified Team, Commonwealth of Independent States, and Ukraine during his career. He claimed bronze for the Soviet Union in Calgary, 1988, and gold for the Unified Team in Albertville, 1992. Russian figure skating coach Tatiana Tarasova has expressed her shock at the USFS decision to dismiss Petrenko. Viktor is one of the best people I know. He is an absolutely clean, decent person, Tarasova told Russia's official state news agency, TASS. We are all friends and happy to see him. He is our friend. He does his job, and it's ugly that he is forbidden to do this. As of July 4th, a total of 4,889 citizens have been killed in Ukraine since Russia launched a full-scale invasion of the nation, according to the UN. However, it is feared that the death toll is far higher. Navka enjoyed a successful figure skating career, notably winning ice dance gold with Roman Kostomarov at the Turin 2006 Winter Games. Following her retirement, Navka has hosted a touring ice show and previously hosted an ice dancing show on Russia's state-owned Channel 1. In March, Navka was sanctioned by the U.S. Department of Treasury in response to the war in Ukraine. According to the Department of Treasury, Navka has a property empire worth more than $10 million, with links to Russian President Vladimir Putin and the country's government. Now, it should be noted that less than 2 weeks ago, Petrenko actually received a scholarship from the president of Ukraine as an Olympic champion. The corresponding decree was signed on June 28th by Vladimir Zelensky, and the funds received are for the rest of his life as an Olympic champion. Now, as vice president of the federation, he had the responsibility of coordinating international activities of the National Figure Skating Federation. Now, this negative attention has certainly been following him online, and I wanted to give some perspective on Petrenko as a Ukrainian, as a member of the Soviet team. It is important here to understand that the lives of Petrenko and Navka crossed Ukrainian-Russian borders to a time when they were from the Soviet sports school and received elevated status as sports stars in their country. Tatiana Navka is from Dnipro, like Oksana Bayul. She would actually later train in New Jersey with Alexander Zhulin, a friend of Viktor Petrenko, for many years. After her competitive career, Navka divorced Alexander Zhulin and married Dmitry Peskov, the press secretary for the Kremlin. Now, Viktor is from Odessa and has largely been in the U.S. since 1992, first in Las Vegas, then Connecticut, and then New Jersey. Now, while one could argue that the Soviet sports school taught them to be top athletes, it has certainly also taught them how to survive systems and excel in opportunism. These athletes have often earned money in Russia, Ukraine, the U.S., and around the world. Now, Tatiana Navka's husband is one of Putin's closest allies and associates. He is a large part of the government that is currently attacking her homeland. Now, while many of her immediate family members have left Ukraine, it is still her homeland, and she still does have ties to Ukraine. One thing to note is that not all Ukrainians are necessarily pro-Ukraine in this situation. In Petrenko's case, I think the situation is more nuanced. Now, Petrenko is a Ukrainian last name. Now, according to his biography, the Petrenko family spoke Russian, which had become dominant in Odessa. It was also a means of inter-ethnic communication throughout the Soviet Union. So Viktor Petrenko attended a Russian-speaking school, and he actually chose English as his foreign language. And because Ukrainian was not used in his family or his school, his biography states that he never learned to speak the native language of his country fluently. Now, this is not an excuse for any of his actions. This is just trying to level set the situation, which is not as black and white, perhaps as one might think, and is perhaps more convoluted. Now, being members of the Soviet national team for many years, Petrenko, along with the other athletes in Zmeyevskaya's group, would spend significant amounts of time at training camps with other Soviet athletes. Many Ukrainians in the U.S. watched Russian news and did not necessarily believe the invasion would happen, including Zmeyevskaya for several weeks prior to the invasion. Many of the Ukrainians would also refer to themselves colloquially as Russian, which is interesting because if you are from New Jersey, one is not really allowed to refer to themselves as being a New Yorker, especially in front of a New Yorker. It's a status and distinction that is not allowed, as being from New York connotes a certain status, and that distinction of being from New Jersey has to be made. It's interesting that this isn't actually the case in Ukrainian-Russian identity. At times, certain former Soviet athletes and coaches refer to themselves as Russian and will actually root for the Russian team at the Olympics as their own, even though they were really part of Team Ukraine following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. In Petrenko's case, he represented the Soviet Union in '88, the unified team in '92, and was able to earn a trip to Lillehammer in '94 after the ISU allowed reinstatement. And he did that as a member of the Ukrainian team, actually displacing longtime training mate Vyacheslav Zagorudniak, who finished second to him at the 1994 European Championships. Now, I first started working with Viktor Petrenko on my jumps over Zoom in May of 2020. Now, he was in Connecticut and New Jersey during the pandemic until he had an opportunity to leave the COVID lockdown and perform in Tatiana Navka's ice shows in Russia, where we saw that the public really pretended that the coronavirus wasn't a thing and audiences weren't wearing masks during that time. Now, he went back and forth between the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine until the winter of 2022. Now, Viktor was in Kyiv when Russia invaded Ukraine, and he would shelter in his apartment at night. Now, a New York Times article actually quoted his daughter about her fears for her father, who was stuck in Ukraine during the invasion. During that time, I helped Galina Zmeyevskaya, Viktor's former mother-in-law, and Nina Petrenko, his ex-wife, publicize a fundraiser and donation drive to help the people of Ukraine, which was run at the Ice House. The rink collected carloads upon carloads of supplies and funds, and they were taken to the JFK airport and subsequently delivered to the Polish Red Cross. Now, Petrenko escaped the invasion of Ukraine in June, and he was actually recently coaching in New Jersey for the students of Julia Lautova. I last saw him on June 28th, and we worked on my jumps at Montclair State Arena. It's interesting because Tatiana Navka actually trained at Montclair State Arena prior to the 2006 Olympic Games. Now, Tatiana Navka and Alexander Zhulin originally trained at the Ice House in Hackensack. And part of the reason why they wound up as Montclair was because they were actually dismissed from the Ice House as part of a scheme where they, along with two other skaters and coaches, were avoiding paying for ice over a long period of time via punch cards and the like. And they were not paying commission. When I last saw Petrenko, He said he was going to Europe to take care of some paperwork and would be back in a few months. Now, today, I was sent a post of Viktor on the ice with Morris Kvitishvili, a Georgian skater best known for performing his toe loop and salchow with the same technique, and Kamila Valieva, who is best known for claiming that her grandfather must have vomited in a glass and caused her to ingest dermatazidine when she was thousands of miles away from him competing at the 2022 Russian Figure Skating Championships. Another interesting aspect of this has to deal with the stunting of identity that can take place through athletics in such an esoteric activity when one isn't going to school, meeting peers, or really going to college. Many athletes live in a relative bubble. And in Petrenko's case, he toured with champions on ice through 2007 until it went out of business. So he wasn't exactly graduating from skating and seeing the outside world. He was earning money performing in a way that is still a relative bubble. Despite seeing the world, it's a really unique activity where one is still earning funds based on an accomplishment that they would have had, 15 years earlier. Now, I would say he is the best technician I have ever worked with on jumps and is quite a supportive coach, but one could get the sense that his passion is not truly in coaching, and he does choose to perform in ice shows for Tatiana Navka, performing largely character roles, not performing the skills of his athletic prime. He does have some students he works with over Zoom, and he was actually even teaching in his apartment from Kyiv during the invasion and would then have to shelter at night. His identity is so interesting because, he's largely been tied to Galina Zmeyevskaya as an athlete, as an assistant coach, but also as a son-in-law. Now, he has been tied to her since he was 9 years old. And this is always really discussed in sweet and favorable terms on American television, but one could wonder about the impact, having such an enmeshed relationship has on your adult development and identity. I think there are similar relationships with Todd Eldridge and Richard Callahan when they have been together for so many decades as an athlete and then as business partners. One could also look at Brian Boitano and Linda Lever. They have had a coach relationship for almost as long as Petrenko and Zmeyevskaya, and Linda Lever has also served as Brian's manager for several decades. But, in Brian's case, he's gone on to establish an adult romantic relationship with an independent party and not still been involved in that same situation and to have such a strong enmeshment. Petrenko has actually been charitable in Ukraine over the years, and he's raised money for Chernobyl relief. And he's known as a really likable coach at the rink. So it's really confusing and disappointing for many people how someone who was sheltering for their life just weeks ago, could then turn and perform for a show in Russia, backed by the wife of a politician, helping to destroy his homeland, just weeks after he escaped. Now, I did reach out to Petrenko's ex-wife, Nina, who has hosted several fundraisers for Ukraine and really donated her time to supporting relief efforts and really been a stalwart in the figure skating community, especially in New Jersey, for Ukrainian relief. And she stated, my mom, my daughter, and I were not aware that Viktor was going to perform in Russia. No one knew about it. We stand with Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. I will put every effort to help my country, my friends, and relatives that suffer from this brutal invasion. We are very disappointed in his decision, and we pray for our country and people that are suffering every day. Slava Ukraini. Now, Galina Muradova, Nina's sister and Petrenko's former sister-in-law, has also raised significant funds for Ukraine at her hair salon in Connecticut. And she said, please, let's put our passion and feelings towards good. If you get a chance, please donate to Maiden United to help with medical supplies. Thank you very much. We love you, and our prayers are with you. Now, I have included a link to Maiden United in the show's description box so that you can donate. Now, it should also be noted that in the photo of Petrenko with Kamila Valieva is Morris Kvitishvili, which I mentioned earlier. And Morris was actually born in Moscow, trains in Moscow with Team Tudoriza, yet represents Georgia. Now, he is currently actually able to earn money in a Russian ice show financed in part by the Kremlin, yet still participate in ISU competitions. Do we really think that is allowed? And why should the ISU allow that? Now, I want to continue with the theme of words and actions. Last week, I reported that Davis and Gleb Smolkin were being monitored at the Montclair State Ice Arena by Sean Redstadt, a top U.S. ice dance judge who was recently elected to chair the ISU Ice Dance Technical Committee. Now, technically, Sean was brought in to monitor the Israeli Federation's ice dance teams by Galit Chait. You have to remember that this is figure skating, and the Israeli Federation and the Azerbaijani Federation are largely run out of the Montclair State Ice Arena in Little Falls, New Jersey. Elena Novak, the new coach of Davis and Smolkin, brought two teams to Montclair to be monitored by Sean as well, including their son and his partner, and Davis and Gleb Smolkin. They did not bring Lorraine McNamara and Anton Spiridonov, their current top team, as Caroline Green and Michael Parsons exited the school as Davis and Gleb Smolkin were officially accepted. So their top American team is actually Lorraine McNamara and Anton Spiridonov. Now, I want to bring up these words and actions because I was present at the rink for my normal practice that morning, and I actually ran into Davis and Smolkin in the lobby as I was getting off the ice and they were getting onto the ice. I would think it would be fair to say that Davis and Elena Novak looked like they saw a ghost because I don't think they knew that I skated there, but that is mere conjecture on my part. Now, this was not even 24 hours after I posted the news that Davis and Smolkin had actually been married in Las Vegas prior to the 2022 World Figure Skating Championships, which Russia and Belarus were banned from. Now, Eteri Tuberidze was not present at the monitoring session as she was in the process of flying back to Russia. If you have been following the public relations videos on Channel 1, you would see a very staged video of Eteri returning to the ice rink with a big smile as all of the skaters are waving and smiling, which as she returns, which is perhaps in stark contrast to the Japanese documentary, if you've seen about Eteri Tuberidze, which you can watch on our Patreon. Now, after this, Diana Davis took to Instagram, and she actually published a statement in Russian as opposed to English after clips of her being monitored were shared on our Instagram. Now, she had been posting in English for several weeks, but she made it clear that she and Gleb Smolkin were members of Team Russia. Now, this is what her statement read. Recently, a lot of false information about us has appeared on the internet, so we would like to clarify the situation. A couple of weeks ago, we decided to leave the group of Igor Spielband and start working with a new team of Elena Novak and Alexei Kilyakov. Under Igor's guidance, we have made a huge step forward in terms of our individual and partner skills. We are immensely grateful to Igor, Pasquale, Natalia, and Adrian for the work done. Training with our new team, we are athletes of the Russian national team, and we are looking forward to starting the new season at the test skates. As for the rest of the news, in figure skating all over the world, there is a practice of receiving comments from various experts in the off-season, which relate to significant technical changes due to newly introduced rules. That is correct. She continues, as for our personal life, we try to protect it and hope for understanding and tact on the part of fans and journalists. Now, it's important to note that a marriage license is a public document in the United States. But let's discuss this, because this situation is not merely black and white. Diana Davis may not actually be lying. You see, when evaluating a potentially toxic relationship, therapists often ask someone to examine their partner and to look at their words and to look at their actions. Now, there are many who would argue over the years that Tuberidze has perhaps been less than forthcoming with the press over the years, and that perhaps some of the actions don't necessarily match the words. So I think I would like to look at this situation largely the same way. We also can remember that when Evgenia Medvedeva left Eteri Tuberidze to train in Canada, Evgenia was attacked in the Russian press after Eteri appeared on Russian state television. And the arguments were that there are plenty of top coaches for Evgenia to skate with in Russia, and it almost appeared that she was being characterized as a traitor to Russia for having a Canadian coach in North America when there are so many skilled coaches in Russia. It can also be argued that it is cheaper for a Russian skater to train in Russia. Now, this is before Russia is being isolated from the rest of the world. You know, there was much more openness prior. So let's look at their coaching situation. According to Match TV, Eteri Tuberidze played a key role in the fact that her daughter, Diana Davis, and her son-in-law, Gleb Smolkin, stopped working with coach Igor Shvetsky. According to the source, Tuberidze had questions for Shvetsky, which could not be resolved even in personal communication during Eteri Tuberidze's visit to the United States. Currently, Diana Davis and her partner Gleb Smolkin have changed coaches and are currently training at the rink with Alexei Kilyakov and Elena Novak in Virginia. However, according to Match TV, the skaters still would like to resume their work with Shvetsky, but the coach at the moment doesn't want to. All right, well, ice dance is a game of politics. As we know, it's always mired in political drama. And it's also set in precedent. So if we go by their words, Davis and Smolkin are Russian athletes. Okay, let's accept that as is. As of today, they are technically Russian athletes, if a release has not been secured. They were in the United States to train with Igor Shvetsky in Michigan. Now, that made sense because Igor is known for training and raising top teams, including Tessa Virtue and Scott Moyer, Merrill Davis and Charlie White, Tanith Belbin and Ben Augusto. He's responsible for developing 2 Olympic champion teams, several world medalists. Also, we have to look at Chalk and Bates, and the Shibutanis are also credited to Igor Shvetsky. Now, following their split from Shvetsky, Tuberidze took Davis and Smolkin around the U.S. They were even seen working with Evgeny Platov in Florida because they needed to find a coach. And they landed with Alexei Kilyakov, Tuberidze's former ice dance partner in Leesburg, Virginia. And they'd actually even gone to Boston to get choreography from Benoit Richaud. Now, this would not be unusual for another American team coach shopping, right? However, Davis and Smolkin are not an American team by their own words. They're a Russian team. And Davis's mother is the biggest force in Russian figure skating and perhaps the biggest master of politics in the figure skating world. Now, Alexei Kilyakov and Elena Novak have been very successful at the novice and junior levels in U.S. ice dance. But we also have to look that they haven't done it on the senior level. They failed to get Green and Parsons to the Olympics after a strong season, and they missed out to the injured and ill-prepared Hawaii and Baker, who struggled in the short dance at U.S. Nationals. They weren't able to get Green and Parsons over the finish line. Now, meanwhile, one of Tuberidze's closest allies in Russian skating and in the press is Alexander Zhulin. He is coach of the 2006 Olympic champions and also the coach of the 2021 world champions in ice dance, Sinitsyn and Katsalapov. Now, if Davis and Smolkin can't find a coach in Spielbahn, why are they looking for one in the U.S. when there are so many top-level dance coaches in Russia? And if they don't want to work with Alexander Zhulin, why not Angelika Krylova, Irina Zhuk? This is ice dance, where it's extremely common for multiple top teams to train together. Tuberidze herself relies on extreme competition in her own ice rink to produce results. So why is her daughter training at a rink without stiff competition, especially with Green and Parsons leaving? And why wouldn't they return to Russia, where they could train alongside many of the other teams who appear stronger than Lorraine McNamara and Anton Spiridonov? This is very interesting. Now, it's also noted that the articles on the Russian press, they have indicated that Davis and Smolkin may participate in U.S. domestic competitions since they are training here. Now, they are training in Virginia, and such a thing wouldn't be so uncommon. Now, with Russia being excluded from the ISU Grand Prix, it would make sense for a team to want exposure and competition. Only Russia is having their own series of competitions in place of the Grand Prix. And with Davis and Smolkin being Olympic team members and her mother being Tuberidze, why wouldn't they simply participate in the Russian competitions and train in Novogorsk? Also, why would a U.S. ice dance judge be monitoring a team that is currently banned from competition? When I spoke to Roman Hagenauer about whether Davis and Smolkin would be admitted to the IM Ice Dance School, he was adamant that they could not admit a team representing a banned country. Now, I thought about that for a few days, and I followed up with him, and I asked, what if their status changed? What if they were no longer Russian athletes? He replied, as always, when a team comes to join IAM, we will have a discussion. We will do the same if they contact us. Now, what about a U.S. judge who is on a committee for the ISU, which recently banned Russia and Belarus from competitions? Why would they monitor our Russian team? We have to ask ourselves, what did Davis and Smolkin's words say? And what do the actions of all involved say? But maybe they aren't technically lying by saying that they are Russian athletes. What if they aren't released? Now, if Davis and Smolkin are not released by the Russian Federation, they would have to sit out of international competition for 2 years from their last competition, the 2022 Olympic Games, if they wanted to represent the U.S. The earliest they could represent the U.S. would be in February 2024. Now, Russia is not being allowed to compete during the 2022 to 2023 season. We don't know about 2023 to 2024. Now, if Russia were to release them, they would be able to compete in February 2023 and then potentially represent the U.S. at the 2023 World Figure Skating Championships. If Russia doesn't release them, they wouldn't be able to represent the U.S., but they also wouldn't be able to go to the World Championships anyway as Russian athletes. Now, Tuberidze herself told the coach at the airport that Davis and Smolkin would represent the U.S., and Nikolai Morozov told me that when he contacted the USFS, they had already been contacted by Tuberidze. Now, if Davis and Smolkin are waiting to be released or to sit out not being released, they would likely still be allowed to participate in U.S. domestic competitions, which the Russian media has already said they may do. If they are not released by Russia, let's say Russia is allowed to return to competition in 2024 or 2025, they could compete in U.S. domestic events without ever losing their Russian status. They would then have the option of competing for the U.S. at the 2024 Worlds in Montreal if Russia is excluded, and going that route if it doesn't seem like Russia will be allowed for the Olympics. Or should Russia be allowed to return for the 2024 Worlds or 2025 Worlds, they could train and compete in U.S. domestic competitions, building their status in the U.S., getting international exposure by being in U.S. competitions, which would be more seen around the world than the Russian competitions that are potentially behind a barrier. And then they could then just return and still represent Russia when Russia returns to international competition. In a sense, you could say that they're keeping their options open. It's very interesting and very smart. Very on brand for Tuberidze. So maybe they aren't necessarily not Russian athletes, but maybe they are necessarily not American athletes. It's a very interesting game of semantics. Look at their words and look at their actions. Now they have gotten married, which opens a path to citizenship. So is this a case of lies being spread about them on the internet? Or is this a case of semantics and keeping their options open? Now, I want to continue this by discussing a recent interview with Russian national team doctor Philip Shvetsky. The article is called, "There is no doping for figure skaters. Hypothetically, sabotage is possible. I have provided the Federal Drug Control Service a set of facts that may determine the motive and possible malicious intent." Dr. Shvetsky, about Valieva's doping scandal. Now, it is important to remember that Dr. Shvetsky is responsible for Kamila Valieva testing positive for a banned substance at the 2016 European Figure Skating Championships, and for having 7 rowers banned from the Olympic Games for his previous doping actions. Why is the Russian Figure Skating Federation, who is adamant that there is no doping in figure skating, hiring a doctor who has been responsible for doping athletes and prohibiting them from competing at international competitions? Now, let's look at this interview. It starts, How free are you today in your assessments and statements? Philip Shvetsky, I am limited only by my personal code of ethics, legal norms, and common sense. But I will be frank with you. After unsubstantiated accusations against me, after threats to me and my family, after shameful anonymous letters to my place of work, I simply have to explain myself. I will try to express my humble opinion about the events that shocked our country and indeed the whole world during the Olympics. Did Valieva take doping? Absolutely not. In the story with Valieva, doping is out of the question. She did not take drugs that could artificially improve her athletic performance. In general, the concept of doping, due to many speculations, scandals, inflated by the press, has come into use and apparently has lost its true meaning for the general public. In the public mind, the image of a bodybuilder immediately appears, who destroys his health by increasing muscle mass. But figure skating is not bodybuilding. The use of the concept of doping in relation to figure skaters is incorrect. There is no doping for figure skaters. And even if one existed under the current system of control, its use is nonsense. To give an athlete doping, knowing that a doping control is ahead, is called a suicidal attempt in psychiatry. A coach and doctor and athlete must be mentally abnormal to decide on this. Fortunately, we have certificates. I even have 2. I work in a hospital and with children at the rink, and therefore I regularly check with a narcologist and a psychiatrist. Therefore, the most important proof for society and the prosecutor is that I have a certificate from these specialists. The only doping that I gave Kamila as a gift was a copy of Picasso's painting, Girl on a Ball. It was painted by an artist friend of mine. I recognized this doping officially. I hoped it helped her. This is interesting. So he is saying that if someone was to give an athlete a banned drug, that it would be a suicidal attempt in psychiatry. Well, ask yourselves, didn't he give Bobrova a banned doping drug ahead of a doping control at the European Championships in 2016? And what about those rowers? So, has he actually been suicidal in the past? Now it continues. What is the basis of your assertion that it is pointless to use doping in figure skating? Let's try to think logically. Doping is a technique that allows you to artificially improve the qualities necessary to achieve a result: strength, speed, endurance, coordination. What can serve as doping in modern conditions of total control? Let's put ourselves in the place of the violator. So first, you need to invent a drug that competitors cannot invent. Secondly, you need to test it on a large number of subjects and develop a scheme for a particular sport. Thirdly, you need to figure out how to hide the use of this drug. In fact, a task for a large research institute with hundreds of employers, biomedical laboratories, and an unlimited budget. Such a task is comparable to the development of a cure for a rare disease. Moreover, the result of the activities of hundreds or even thousands of specialists is not at all guaranteed. In relation to figure skating, the task becomes more complicated multiple times. After all, a drug that increases strength leads to a loss of coordination, and one that increases speed leads to a loss of strength, and one that increases coordination leads to a loss of endurance. I think doping for figure skating is, in principle, an insoluble medical pharmacological task. Now, notice the word salad that he just did. He talked about if strength, it would lead to a loss of coordination. If coordination, it leads to a loss of endurance. He did not say, what if it increases endurance? What happens? Notice Shvetsky didn't go there. Now, can you explain in a simple way what trimetazidine is and how it got into Valieva's body? Trimetazidine is one of the drugs banned by the World Anti-Doping Agency. In medicine, it is prescribed to elderly patients with ischemia to protect cardiomyocytes. It's a heart drug, the muscle cells of the heart. It is taken in combination with other drugs only by a cardiologist's prescription. I totally butchered the kinds of cells in the heart. There are no medical or any reasons to prescribe this drug to Valieva. This, I repeat, would be a manifestation of insanity. In the doping test, the concentration of this drug is so low that there is no doubt this is not a systemic, but a single accidental hit, perhaps some kind of incident of an unknown trace, but definitely a minimum dose. Otherwise, in the doping tests before and after, there would be a trace of trimetazidine. How could it get into Valieva's body? Our version, which we presented to CAS during the Olympics, is from someone from the inner circle who could take a complex that included trimetazidine. It is clear to any expert that in the case of Valieva, one can only talk about a single accidental dose. I am grateful to the headquarters of the Center for Sports Medicine of the FMBA of Russia and the Olympic Committee of the Russian Federation at the Olympic Games for their help in substantiating this version. Now, how could this physically happen? Could she have drank water from the same glass with a relative, through a kiss, a handshake? If we knew the mechanism, our positions in court would be much stronger. But unfortunately, we do not know this. And in this case, it is not even the mechanism that is important, but strong argument. This is not a systematic use. In the media and social networks, a version was discussed that trimetazidine could get along with some kind of dietary supplement, an amino acid complex. How likely is this? I would exclude this version. We have all dietary supplements checked, and we should not exaggerate their role. In figure skating, their use is very limited due to the nature of the sport, the age of the athletes, the need to maintain weight. The elements necessary for figure skaters are in food. The athlete must receive a sufficient amount of water, replenish electrolytes, amino acids that are lost due to exercise. All of this is contained in harmless bioadditives. Skaters usually use high-quality amino acid complexes rather than buying them from a market somewhere. Now let's look at this. He said that skaters need to receive a sufficient amount of water. Well, remember that Zagitova told us in interviews that she wasn't allowed to drink water before the World Championships? And also, how about how he talks about how figure skaters are not using dietary supplements? What about Anna Shcherbakova, who was only consuming dietary supplements at the 2022 Olympic Games? Now, the interview continues. We are often told that the WADA system itself is flawed, that the principle by which the list of prohibited drugs is formed is doubtful. If we agree to someone else's rules of the game, then we need to follow them. Although many of WADA's decisions regarding the banned list seem dubious to me as well. For example, the use of xenon is prohibited. He even brings up xenon. Our scientists learned how to use this inert gas as an anesthetic as early as 1962. Xenon is also the subject of my PhD thesis. In addition to the figure skating team, I work as a resuscitator at the Hospital for War Veterans No. 2 and successfully apply our achievements there. For example, we use xenon in the treatment of COVID infection. Our techniques allow us to achieve a noticeable cardioprotective effect, reduce anxiety, and I also found an important area of xenon application, improving the quality of life in chronic fatigue syndrome, which is often accompanied by back pain. It could also be used in sports medicine, but WADA prohibits it. Why? It is not clear. It is contained in the air we breathe, apparently only in Russia. Now let's wait a second. He's saying that it can help chronic fatigue. Now even, let's say that it's not giving energy, but it's helping to relieve back pain and reduce anxiety. Think of how many Team Tudoriza athletes have had back pain and visible anxiety from training. It's Team Tudoriza. Think about how that could even help them in competition. By his own words, he's bringing up xenon. Also, that they're using it for COVID infection. Remember when Anna Shcherbakova was shown inhaling a gas when she was rumored to have COVID at the 2021 Russian Figure Skating Championships? But I digress. In relation to the situation with Valieva, was the version of sabotage considered? After all, the political anti-Russian background of the doping scandals is obvious. While in fierce competition could theoretically also become a motive, there are many stories of this kind of history. To go to CAS with this version, you need to have an evidence base, a video, for example, in which a certain villain pours something forbidden into Kamila's drink. And without evidence, it is useless to offer a version of sabotage. They simply will not consider it well-founded and will disqualify without further ado. That is, in your opinion, sabotage is excluded? Hypothetically, sabotage is possible. Because of COVID, the athletes were in quarantine for a long time, in a specially organized bubble, both at the training camp and at training and at competitions. Someone from outside could not penetrate behind the scenes. To carry out sabotage, add or mix something, it really possible only in the locker room, in the toilet, but there's no video surveillance. There was no such bubble, only during the Russian Nationals in St. Petersburg. And a doping test from this competition turned out to be positive. I emphasize that I am not stating anything, just trying to analyze. Perhaps it would be logical for the intelligence agencies to investigate this story. After all, there are plenty of questions and versions. Recently, I was called to the Federal Drug Control Service, and it took me 4 hours to tell in detail what and how happened before, during, and after the competitions. I provided the Federal Drug Control Service, and we'll figure it out. I hope that they will figure it out, and they'll be able to open this Chinese box. I provided a set of circumstantial facts that may determine the motive and possible malicious intent. And I also wrote a letter to the investigative committee. I set out the facts in detail and gave an assessment of the publications in the media which related to the doping scandal. When the story with Valieva happened, one of the German TV channels showed a movie, in fact, another anti-Russian propaganda. Unitary Tutberidze became the main target. The Germans hinted that Dr. Shvetsky had been involved in doping scandals in the past. Can you briefly explain what it was about? In 2006, the Russian rowing team where I worked was disqualified for 2 years. Coaches, athletes, staff. The violation was an allowed drug was taken in a non-allowed way, intravenously. I won't go into details, but using the events of 2006 as an argument against me is simply absurd. Moreover, this case has already been considered retrospectively in the Petrenko court in Moscow, where I fully defend my honest name and reputation. So to use this old story as compromising evidence means to show incompetence. I'm not even talking about the moral side and the professional standards of journalism. But it's not even sad that the Germans mislead and manipulate. This is their style. They solve their political issues in this way, intending to slander our country. It is sad that some Russian media have gone the same way, trying to increase the audience with hot facts. Even some of the representatives of the legislature make comments. They say, by what right do I work with athletes of the Russian national teams? Much of what is happening in the media and social networks surprise me with arrogance and amateurism. Unfortunately, some of the journalists are focused only on cheap fame, ratings, and do not even think to understand the essence. In relation to me, their statements in the media were completely unfair and offensive. But unfortunately, such publications form public opinion. Unsubstantiated accusations rain down on me, threats to crack down on me and my family. Someone sent an anonymous letter to the hospital where I work, demanded my dismissal. Real haunt began. Curses were poured in Russian social networks. A German propaganda movie was played for days on the Central European channel. The Germans, in their movie, presented Terry Tutberidze as a despot. This topic often arises in the discussion of the methods of Terry Georgievna in the Russian media. Do you have something to answer? There are two absolutely groundless myths: that such impressive results in women's figure skating are achieved with the help of doping, and the second, that the result is ensured by the coach's despotism. But of course, the reason for success lies elsewhere in the talent, the character of the athlete, the enormous work through pain and fatigue. It's just that Terry Tutberidze knows how to motivate, to train to the limit. Unfortunately, this answer does not suit many. Even in the professional community, among athletes, some people are trying to find other explanations for other people's records. To a certain extent, it's jealousy and envy. In such cases, I propose to work, as they do in the Tutberidze group, to learn how to leave the comfort zone and endure. And when you can't endure, you start to justify yourself and suspect others. But for such hard workers, as for example our legendary skier, Bolshanov, you don't need to explain the secret of success. After all, he was even upset that at the Olympics he had to run a distance, not of 50 kilometers, but only 30. Tell us how Valieva was going through this difficult, dramatic situation. Kamila, of course, is a child by age, but for athletes, I think a year goes like a year and a half. Just like for us, doctors working in intensive care. In some matters, they have a childish perception of life, but sports teach you to quickly adapt to difficult life circumstances, and in sports you grow up faster. At first, she didn't even show that there were reasons to be worried. She reacted with dignity, waiting for this situation to be resolved, but then it turned out that because of her doping test, the whole team was under threat. And she took such a turn very emotionally. She burst into tears. For a long time, she could not calm down. This is an indicator that she is not just a well-educated girl, but a person. For her, it became a trauma, stress that she let her team down, that her teammates would suffer. Most likely, you have to play the role not only of a doctor, but also a psychologist. Do you think that Valieva was able to cope with stress? Has she already returned to normal? Can we say that psychological problems are in the past? In any team, a doctor and a massage therapist sometimes provide not even psychological, but psychiatric assistance, because psychology has an indirect relation to the sport of the highest achievements. Its role should not be exaggerated. Coaches mostly see athletes in training, and they come to us to cry. In this sense, we have a tandem with a massage therapist. They come to complain about some troubles in life and about unhappy love. As for Kamila, I think she is fine now. In any case, at the Channel 1 Cup, she performed at her usual, highest level. Kamila proved that she is a strong personality. In general, it seems to me that the problems that Kamila had, and I hope will not arise again, are due to the fact that she is ashamed of her perfection. I think you can't do that in sports and in art. On the stage, on the ice, on the basketball court, in the ring, such an attitude towards yourself will only hinder. You must be able to enjoy what you are doing. In everyday life, you can be modest. Modesty is a good trait. To enjoy your work as a team doctor is not so easy. Anyway, apparently, judging by your story. Despite everything, I am grateful to fate that I was lucky to work in such a cosmic team. Athletes, coaches, colleagues in the Russian national team. We managed to confidently overcome difficulties during the pandemic and perform well at the Olympic Games, despite the provocations and unsportsmanlike methods of our competitors. We were able to prove that we are the best team in the world, a real dream team. Well, it's important to note here that this story is going to continue because in August, the Russian side of the anti-doping story is supposed to conclude their investigation, at which time WADA and CIS can commence theirs. There's certainly more to come on this situation. I want to take one more look at words versus actions. Now, Match TV posted on June 21st, the Russian anti-doping agency Rusada has never tested figure skaters Kamila Valieva and Anna Shcherbakova for 5 months in 2022. Alexandra Trusova during this time passed a doping test twice. Athletes who competed at international competitions or were included in international testing pools could be tested by international organizations. Well, why wouldn't Rusada test Kamila or Anna, two of their top contenders for the Olympics, especially when Kamila tested positive for trimetazidine prior to the 2022 Olympics, and Anna Shcherbakova won the gold medal at the Olympic Games? Why wouldn't Rusada just test all of their top athletes? It's food for thought.